Audio unleashed.
We have stuff to talk about in audio in 2024.
We do, man. What do you want to talk about this week?
I think we're going to talk about, we have a variety of topics queued up.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start like real quickly because we got a nice piece of reader mail from a guy named Jay Hader. Can we just deal with that right now?
Let's do it.
Because he brought up a great point.
Mm-hmm.
We had talked about the Shanling UA1 Plus USB headphone DAC dongle amp thing as one of the coolest things of 2023, which I liked because it was really simple. It's like $50. It's got decent power. It's actually got like user selectable digital filters, which is really cool. So anyway, Jay Hader, one of our readers, wrote in to say, have you guys had a chance to play with the Cultivating 5K, which is a Bluetooth, it's like a DAC processor amp, which you can use with the USB or you can use it with Bluetooth. And it's got a lot of, sort of the upscale variants of Bluetooth. More important than that, though, I think it's got an amp. It's got an app that does even more than the Shanling app does. It actually gives you like a 10-band EQ per channel or 20-band global EQ. You can select from like 8 digital filters or something. And plus, it's got, many of the good high-quality variants of Bluetooth, and it's got a ton of power. It's got a lot more power than the Shanling. I can't remember the numbers, but if you look at my upcoming Wirecutter review of these things, you can see. And it's got balanced output on a 2.5 millimeter balanced connector. And so it's a better product. I think it's only like $105 on Amazon right now. It's actually a better product. I didn't highlight it. So Jay, thank you for that suggestion. It's actually going to be one of our Wirecutter picks. It's a great product. It's really a shocking what you get for a little over $100. I mean, it is astounding. It's actually a more advanced product than the vast majority of audiophile DACs, and it's got Bluetooth. And it's got like a little metal clip where you can clip it. Well, that's true, but you can clip it to your clothing and plug your headphones into it, and it's a great product. I focused on the Shanling because for sort of personal reasons, because for me, I'm not bringing super, super hard to drive headphones to, the library. I do have a phone with a headphone jack, but it's all worn out now. And so I have to use a dongle, and the Shanling is really cheap and really tiny. It's actually a lot easier to work. It has a control on there, which you don't even need to bother with. You just plug it in and you use your phone's volume control, and it's really simple. Has tons of power, sounds good, has stuff you can play with. And so for my purposes, it's better, but I think for audiophiles who want to get in there and really mess with stuff and maybe alter the sound of their headphones or whatever, the Cultivating is just a truly amazing product. I mean, it is shock. I was completely shocked when I tested it. I was like, oh my God, look at all the stuff in this thing.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah. So Jay, good call. You're right. And that is going to be one of our picks coming up for our Wirecutter headphone DAC amp article or whatever we call it.
Very cool.
So, but thanks for the mail too. But we are going to start with a discussion about something that some people will probably love and some people will probably hate. And that's an article in Audio Express, which is a like super, super technical kind of an engineering journal dealing with audio, which I happen to write for. I'm quite proud of that too, because not just any schmo can write for Audio Express. So it's very heavy duty technical stuff, but they have an article, Neurable partners with Master and Dynamic to launch brain-computer interface-enabled headphones. And so these things are reading your brain waves and then adapting their operation to optimize the experience for your mood or something like that. Am I sounding skeptical?
Maybe but not enough.
We'll go a little. This is a now look. Let's say this is a groundbreaking thing, and this is something like we've sort of seen in sci-fi movies for a long time. And like going back to at least to like The Empire Strikes Back, where you have that bald dude with like the thingy on his head that Lando Calrissian is like, is like communicating with, and probably a long time before that. But we're getting to the point where this stuff is becoming actually practical and usable on apparently some level, and these things are shipping in Q1 of this year. So I guess we're going to get to find out. Yeah. It'll be reviewed by a lot of mainstream people and not many audiophiles. So
yeah.
That's the perspective we'll get. So we have other stuff, though. What else do we have coming up?
We got a video that you sent to me by Danny Ritchie of GR Research called Now These Are Legit. Legit is, I think he spelled legit the way I say unleashed. And then he goes on to say, checking out the Polk LSIM 703. Interesting, for people who haven't seen Danny's videos, he basically does a deconstruction of a speaker, does sort of analysis of what's good about it, what's bad about it, and recommends modifications to make it better. This one stood out for a few interesting points that he made. We'll dig into that. I won't spoil too much right now, but there's some things he said in this video that I think got both of our ears perked up a little bit. So we're going to dig into that and let people know what those are. What else we got?
There's a video which we found on the Absolute Sound website, which normally for us would send off all kinds of red flags and flags of every conceivable color. But it's a review of a PSI Audio Active Bass Trap, and I've been kind of dimly aware of this sort of product. It's sort of like a subwoofer. You can think of it like a subwoofer with a microphone, I guess. And so instead of outputting bass coming from whatever you're listening to, your Bootsy Collins record or something, because that has bass, it actually reacts to the bass in your room and sends out canceling waves, sort of like a noise canceling headphone. The guy, what is he? The guy, he bills himself as the head of the Department of Philosophy there or something like that.
Tom Martin
does this review. And actually for the Absolute Sound, it's a really, I think, well thought out review with legitimate technical statements. But it actually kind of raises a lot of it's worth looking at, and it's interesting for people that are into bass. I'm not going to say there's any giant problems I would warn people off of in terms of the statements that he makes, but it raises a lot of interesting questions as far as like, why do audiophiles deal with bass in a lot of really complicated and expensive ways when they can do it better for cheaper? Is that a good way to put it?
I think that's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Well, we're going to dig into that because, first of all, I think I can make some claim as to being a subwoofer expert at this point.
I don't understand why you're so hesitant about that. I mean, you're one of a handful of the big ones, man.
Okay,
you're in an elite group of subwoofer experts.
I wrote an article about subwoofer measurements for Voice Coil magazine, which is the technical journal of the speaker industry. And none of my fellow reviewers did that.
You also wrote the instruction manual for CTA 2010.
I chose to do that. That's sort of like I could write an instruction manual for your Corvette or something if I wanted to. It wouldn't. It's good. I just did it because nobody else would. Yeah. So we're going to have one more segment after that for our Patreon subscribers. And what are we going to do in that segment?
Oh boy, there's a gauntlet being thrown down here. You had the idea, and I think it's a good one. I just wish I'd had thought about it a little bit longer. That we're going to talk about our predictions for audio in 2024. I think that's all I'm going to say about that. I think we're gonna be all over the place, and but yeah, I mean, hey, we did our wrap up of 2023. Why not stick our necks out and predict what's going to happen in 2024? We'll see.
Yeah, then we can come back in another year and find out if we were right or wrong.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like,
See, we have a built-in segment for like a year down the road.
Yeah,
It's one less
absolutely.
idea we got to come up with.
There you go. But first,
headphones with brain-computer interface. Let me just read a little bit of this, okay? For over a decade, the Boston-based company, this is Neurable, has been developing Neurable AI, a brain-computer interface technology that is intended to be applied to wearables and enables novel capabilities such as cognitive performance features. So according to Neurable, the MW75 Neuro will know when the user will need to take a brain break. By reading brain signs, Neurable AI will recommend when the user needs to stop what he is doing to recharge, to reduce burnout, and boost productivity. Okay, and the app will deliver reports that help uncover what affects our focus and what time of day our focus is best so we can plan our most productive day.
Yeah.
Oh boy, this is great. My company should buy one of these for me so I'm more productive. And then it also, I believe it also figures out what music you should listen to suit your mood, which I know you've had problems doing that in the past, figuring out what music to listen to suit your mood.
No, I'm generally pretty good at that. Yeah.
However, Neurable's technology was validated by the U.S. Air Force and rewarded with a contract to apply the technology to the U.S. military, while the company has raised over $20 million in VC funding. So, and this is an actual product, MW 75 Neuro headphones coming out from Master and Dynamic, and which makes pretty good semi-high-end-ish headphones.
Are those semi-high-end-ish, or they just seem straight up high-end to me?
No, they're like, they're kind of like mass market headphones. They're kind of in the same space as like maybe being Bowers and Wilkins headphones or Dolly headphones. They're like, I think they have stuff for $200-$300, but they have a lot of stuff for $300, $400, $500. So it's a little fancier than normal and a little nicer build quality, fancy animal skins and metals and such. And I've reviewed a few, and I think there were some I liked a lot, and some I don't think are so great. But kind of like my reaction to Bowers and Wilkins stuff.
Yeah.
So you are the AI guy. I'm not. What do you feel about your headphones having AI to do stuff?
Well, gosh, I have a lot of complicated thoughts, to be honest with you. I think, let's put things in perspective here. When we're talking about AI with regard to this product, what are we talking about? We're talking about pattern recognition, right?
Okay.
And it's sort of similar. I think a lot of the times these days we're talking about AI, we're talking about, text generation, we're talking about image generation, we're talking about things like that. This to me doesn't seem to be like that. This seems to be more like, and I'm not an Android guy, you are, but maybe Android does this too, but like iPhone, my wife and I have a habit of going to have dinner with my dad on Thursday nights. And that's just the night that we sort of organically picked. So when I get into the car, Apple Maps goes, oh, it's Thursday night. You usually go to your dad's house on Thursday night. We're just going to go ahead and give you a recommendation and say, hey, click this button and we'll map the course to your dad's house. And it's like 12 minutes with traffic, right? This is kind of that kind of AI, right? It is looking at larger patterns. It is looking for sort of repeatable instances of whatever. But I looked into the technology that Neurable is selling a few years ago. Maybe it was a year ago, and I think this is sort of simultaneously way less nefarious than people might assume, but also more nefarious in other ways, right? So a lot of the headlines right now are saying, oh, these headphones can read your mind. They're reading your thoughts. Well, they're not. What they're doing is they're looking for which parts of your brain are active, right? So the technology basically goes, oh, hey, right now there's a lot of activity going on in your prefrontal cortex. That means you're probably concentrating on something, right? And so where the AI comes in with these things, as I understand it, is basically to say, oh, a lot of activity in the prefrontal cortex. You're probably paying attention to something. We're going to make sure we're turning on noise cancellation, right? And we're also going to put you in a certain focus mode. Like with iPhone, they've got different focus modes for, sleep or what have you. And these things will just go, oh, we're going to put you into a sort of a do not disturb mode automatically.
Okay.
I don't, in principle, have a problem with that. Although I don't see why you can't just put your phone in the focus mode that you want to, because generally when I'm concentrating on something, I know that I'm concentrating on something and I know to put my phone in focus mode. Like, here's the thing that scares me though, right? These things aren't reading your mind. They're not collecting your thoughts, but do you remember the story from about 10 years ago where a father got irate because Target started sending his teenage daughter ads for maternity stuff, and he's like, "Why are you accusing my daughter of being pregnant?" And then it turned out she was pregnant, and she didn't even know. Like Target figured it out basically just based on her shopping preferences, because she was a member of their whatever program, and she would scan her card, and they looked at what she was buying. Hey, she's craving this, she's buying that, whatever. That's what pregnant people do. And they just accidentally figured out she was pregnant and she didn't even know it. My concern is that we're going to start seeing information of that ilk sold to people that I don't want it sold to. I mean, at this point in time, like everything you do and every bit of data that's being collected on you is building a model of you that is way more accurate than you want it to be, right? So do we want to add one more dimension to that? Do we want to add brain activity as a, correlated with time of day or activity to the information that these companies is gathering on you? And they made a big spiel about, we demand that our partners respect the privacy of blah, blah, blah. But it's yeah, okay. But we've heard that before, and it is always a lie, right? It's always a lie. So I'm not worried about this thing, figuring out my kinks or whatever. I'm just worried about giving more information to people who are building a model of me that I don't want them having. That's my concern. What do you think?
Okay. I don't want my headphones suggesting stupid music to me that I don't want to listen to. As we've discussed, with like Spotify, where like you listen to something for a while, and then if you have the thing set on to where it says continue playing, which sometimes it can be good, but a lot of times, you're listening to, let me think of a new example. You're listening to Led Zeppelin, they put on Heart, and I don't really care about people that imitate Led Zeppelin. I might go from Led Zeppelin to, say, Bad Company, which didn't imitate Led Zeppelin, but was great and was from the same era. So it's not necessarily in the idea that this thing is sensing my moods, which it may or may not do accurately. It's more like I have yet to find a recommendation scheme of this sort that I can get super excited about. I use it on Spotify, and like I said, sometimes it works, and sometimes it's stupid. So it goes. It's just sort of like when you're recommending music to friends. Sometimes they like what you recommend, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I was before I canceled Spotify one day. I had created a radio station based on something from Frampton Comes Alive. I was just in that kind of mood that day, and it was one of those things where it's like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes into this radio station, they played that. Do you remember that stupid mashup from, was it the late 70s or early 80s? It was a mashup of Baby I Love Your Way and Freebird by like the stupid dance pop band.
No, I'm glad I missed that one.
That got put up in the rotation. And it's just like,
that's pretty bad.
Yeah. That's like not even the same genre anymore. It's just, Peter Frampton happened to write half of that mashup. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is one of those kind of things like, like the old thing from Jurassic Park where the guy, Dr. whoever his name, says, well, did you ever stop to think whether or not you should do this?
Oh, yeah. You were so concerned about whether you could, you didn't stop to think about whether or not you should.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's this whole thing. It's like, okay, well, we have the ability to read some brain waves and we have some pretty heavy duty computing going on in these headphones now. Mm-hmm. Or at least, or maybe they do it in the phone and then talk to the headphones. I don't know. Well, let's do something with that. Whether or not something needs to be done. I mean, I have no problem ever coming up with something to listen to. I just did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days of driving during the holidays. And I never ran out of ideas for things to listen to. It's like there's so many things I got so many. That's the great thing about Spotify and any other service like that is that there's just so many bands that, like for me, that I could never afford to go listen to because, you had to buy a concert ticket or you had to buy an album, and albums were, $8 or $10 at the time, and I could only afford to buy 1 or 2 a month. So I couldn't go listen to an artist that I was slightly curious about. I listened to Patti Smith for the first time in my life. And,
wow.
it wasn't like I wasn't like, oh my God, this is so great. But it's like, oh, okay, I can see why people liked her. I bet going to CB's at 1975 or 76 and seeing her there, that was probably very exciting. So,
yeah.
And I listened to the guy who does Audiophilia, the website, all of his Facebook, Anthony, darn it, what's his last? Kershaw. I look at his classical recommendations on Facebook, and they're always spot on because he really knows his stuff. And he recommended a violinist named David Oistrakh, and I'm like, who's this guy? And so I downloaded some stuff and I kind of dug into him. I listened to a lot of his stuff, and the dude he was a Russian guy. He was one of the really great violinists of the 20th century. I just never happened to heard of. And he spent most of his career in Russia, but God, the recordings are great. I mean, just wonderful, even over on Spotify, Og Vorbis, listening to him in my car was spectacular.
Yeah.
So, it's like, I already have all this, it's like I really think that, by, if you kind of tune into a few, for want of a better word, influencers who can steer you towards some good music that you haven't heard. And that might be, a jazz magazine, or it might be a classical reviewer that you like, or it might be Pitchfork, or I don't know what, but there's just so many things out there. Why do I need AI to kind of take a guess as to what might, a really dumb, obvious guess as to what might amuse me? Okay, here's a great example. You're listening to, say, Yes, Fragile or something, right? And Fragile runs out, and then maybe they'll play Styx, Domo Arigato, Mr. Roboto, right? Which technically is sort of prog rock. And there is some overlap in genres between Styx and Yes. But, I don't ever want to hear Domo Arigato, Mr. Roboto ever again. The guys in Styx don't ever want to hear that again.
Oh, they won't play it. I mean, I've been seeing Styx live since the late 80s. I was a little too young to see them in their heyday. Yeah. Tommy's from Montgomery, right? Every time Tommy would come to town, he would come to church with me, right? So, but yeah, it's like they would not play Mr. Roboto. They would absolutely refused, and they would tease people and sort of play the intro, and then stop and joke. No, we're not going to play that crap.
Good.
Yeah,
but see, Spotify doesn't know that.
No,
so, and this AI thing in these headphones doesn't know that either.
I think we're too enamored with algorithms. I think we're too enamored with machines. I'm on a big weight loss journey right now, and my dad has sort of seen my results, and he's coming along with me. And we go to the gym every day together. We swim at the Y. I'm swimming a mile a day now, and we both are Apple users, so we both have Apple Watches, and I'm using the fitness app to sort of track and inform a little bit, and I'm using it to basically augment my decision-making process in terms of my overall fitness. My dad is an absolute slave to it. And like one day we went for a swim and he forgot to engage his fitness app, so it didn't track his workout. Mm-hmm. And for my dad, it was like, well, he might as well not have done it. Like, I just wasted my time. I don't even want to know why I swam today. And I'm like, you swam because of the health benefits. Well, I didn't track it. I didn't ain't in my app. It's just lost forever. And it's like, okay, but who cares, right? And I've come to realize that I think my dad's mentality is more common perhaps than mine is, right? I think people are just, and absolutely. I don't know if they think that there is perhaps some impartiality or objectivity built into these machines, but people forget these algorithms are written by people, right? These algorithms are often written by people who want to make a buck off of you. So I don't know, keep that in mind. I'm not saying don't buy these headphones that track your brain waves and do whatever. I'm just do it for the right reasons, man. And I don't learn to use the focus modes on the phone yourself and take charge of your own, screen time or whatever. I don't know. It just get off my lawn. This all bothers me.
This is one of the trends that we can look at for that we'll be tracking closely here on Audio
Unleashed
to keep our listeners informed as to not necessarily what's going on in audio, but what we think about what's going on in audio.
Yeah. All right.
Ramble
break.
Off.
Get some water. Ramble Off. One of my favorite Led Zeppelin tunes. All right. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. This is Audio
Unleashed.
And I am Brent, and the other guy is the guy with the good radio voice is Dennis. The guy with the harsh and shrill voice is Brent. Now you know.
Oh, come on.
Some people find my voice mellifluous, and many find it harsh and shrill. It depends on who you ask, and it's their emotional reaction more than an actual accurate assessment of my voice's frequency response spectrum. Our next segment, we're going to talk about, there's a guy, Danny Ritchie, who does GR Research, which is a YouTube channel and a speaker tweaking and consultancy service based in Dallas, I think. And we look at this stuff a lot because he does really, really, really in-depth technical teardowns of different speakers. And one of the things I love, I mean, we've referred to his channel as an endless well of disappointment because he so often is disappointed by, big brand speakers. He'll measure them and tear them and find pretty horrific stuff going on, and he'll tear them apart and go like, well, here's why.
Yeah,
they could have fixed this, but why did they do this? He's just constantly in a mode of like, why did they do this? And he's right. So anyway, so Danny does these teardowns, and this one was notable because he actually liked the speaker. And that's why it caught my attention. And, his headline is, "Now These Are Legit." And it's a Polk LSIM 703. And this is a speaker that came out about 10 years ago from Polk, a higher end Polk model that was, so 10 years ago, it was about $1,500 a pair. It's a 3-way bookshelf speaker that's big, and he does a teardown of it. And I was captivated by this because, first of all, I was thrilled that he had, Polk is not a brand that I think gets as much respect as it deserves. And granted, Polk has made some pretty wacky speakers in the past, like 30 years ago or something, right? Back when hardly anybody knew how to make speakers in the first place. But, and they have been often something of a real mass market brand. And so that's why they probably don't get as much. And they were like heavily advertised in Stereo Review back in the day, and Matt Polk would have his lab coat on and stuff. And so I think that, they didn't talk enough about inner detail to get the to get the respect of audiophiles. So I'm happy to see Polk getting some respect here. So I had to, since like he made it obviously he liked the speakers. I'm like, okay, let me see what it's like when he actually likes the speaker. And so, but however, this was a very puzzling video to me because some of what he said seemed to kind of conflict with at least my perceptions of, audio and speakers. And a lot of it was, he kind of got into, normally he's like super ultra rational, but he kind of started to get into some of the kind of claims that speaker manufacturers make where they make a plausible technical claim like, oh, we went with this material because it has excellent damping properties and so therefore it's superior. And my response to that is always, where are the listening tests?
Yeah.
Let's
be honest.
At least where are the measurements, but preferably where are the listening tests?
Yeah, let's be honest. He says a lot of things in this video that contradict a lot of the things that he says in this video. So,
well, that's true. Yeah. So So let me go into part of it here. And again, this guy's really cool. All right.
Yeah.
You like this guy.
Oh yeah.
But some of this video needed like editing or something because some of the stuff was just weird. He talks about how he shows the frequency response of this thing, and it's pretty flat. Now I went back and looked at John Atkinson did measurements of this thing in Stereophile 10 years ago, and his measurements were a little different than what Danny did. I mean, Danny's doing more of a technical teardown than a full-on technical assessment of the speaker. Mm-hmm. But John's measurements showed absolutely dead flat mid-range and with a rise in the treble. And Danny's were kind of more, bumpy, but still good. However, he praises the frequency response, but then he talks about the spectral decay, which I refer to as waterfall because it kind of looks like a waterfall. And this shows you, if you hit a speaker with an impulse, right? How does it decay? And what parts of the speaker store energy and then release it? What parts of the speaker have resonance? Like if a speaker has a big resonance at, 2 kilohertz, and you hit it with a broadband noise tone, that 2 kilohertz is going to ring. And basically the spectral decay is you take a whole bunch of, effectively what you're doing is taking a whole bunch of frequency response measurements, like every millisecond or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And you're watching what tones die out and what tones don't. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the waterfall response in this thing is super clean. According to his measurements, now John Atkinson's measurements, Danny did it with a microphone, right? Which is the way I would do it. And that's fine. But John Atkinson does it with a little transducer that he sticks onto the side of an accelerometer that he sticks onto the side of the speaker in different parts. And he tries to find the resonances. And he found some more. But still, Danny's, raving about how clean the waterfall response is. But then he talks about how the waterfall response is what tells you how a speaker sounds, and that the frequency response really does not. And the speaker frequency response just tells you how accurate the speaker is. And this kind of confused me a lot because, if you look at all the research that Harman and the Canadian NRC have done, the frequency response is the thing that really counts the most in the speaker. And that does tell you what it sounds like. I mean, if I see a 5 decibel rise in the treble with a speaker above 7 kilohertz or something, I know it's going to sound bright. That's all there is to it. Whereas if I see a waterfall response and I see a resonance I might not hear that, or I might hear it. I don't know how much actual research there is into that. I have not encountered it. I know that my good buddy Van Stickerson, who wrote the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook and who's editor of Voice Coil, sort of looks at the waterfall responses like, well, you can tell maybe some things from it, but it's pretty. It looks cool.
Yeah.
So that was somewhat baffling to me because, as I see it, and I think as most of the researchers see it, frequency response is what does tell you how a speaker is going to sound. Mm-hmm. And the waterfall response, I'm not so sure. But do you want to talk more about do you want to go on from here, or shall I keep babbling? Because I could go on forever about this.
I'll bring up one thing and get your reaction to it. And I also wanted to bring up his waterfall measurements because he says at one point, and I quote, "The spectral decay is as clean as it gets." So he's basically saying, I measured this, and in terms of what I care about, right, it's as good as it gets, right? And then he goes on and talks about the basically the electronics in the speaker, and he's talking about how the little iron core inductor is inferior, and how he's going to replace it with an air core inductor. And he says, the little iron cores tend to hold a residual charge, and it tends to smear the signal. Well, I mean, he's already told us that it's not. That's not a problem with the speaker. The spectral decay is as clean as it gets. And then he goes on to say he needs to replace the electronics because it'll cause this signal to smear. We'll make up your mind, buddy.
Well, I mean, he's got a point. Okay, look, if you have a metal core inductor, right, which is the cheaper ones, because you can make them smaller if they're metal core and get the same value in a smaller, cheaper package, right?
Yeah.
So the metal core does saturate with magnetic energy coming from the coil of wires around it. And when the charge is removed, the magnetic energy goes back out into the coil of wires. Okay, so, and with air core inductors, that doesn't happen. So it is generally accepted the air core inductors are better for speakers. They're just a lot bigger and more expensive typically. Sure. So I don't argue that he might not have a point there. I mean, I wouldn't. If he wants to claim that these things sound better because of this, that's fine. But that ought to show up in the waterfall measurement, right? If it's actually storing energy that you can hear.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's already told you. He's already told you. No, this thing is as clean as it gets, and then he says, "But I have to replace this thing because it makes it smeared." And it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
What?
So I kind of think I think a lot of what he's saying is plausible, except
he's already undermined it.
I want to see it show up in the measurements or in a listening. As I say a lot, if it doesn't show up in measurements or a listening test, I don't care about it.
Yeah.
And by listening test, I mean a blind listening test, a serious, controlled listening test, not some dude sitting around listening at who knows if the levels are matched and who knows what conditions. And of course, it's cited, so he's got bias. And, I actually, this inspired me to go into the AES e-library. That's Audio Engineering Society e-library at aes.org. And I'm a member, so I can go download anything. I went in there for free. And I went and searched for papers I thought there's got to be papers talking about the quality of crossover components and how that affects the sound in a controlled listening test. I couldn't find anything. I mean, it doesn't mean there's nothing. It just means my search terms didn't yield anything, but they probably should have, and I can't remember seeing anything about that. And there's nothing, to my knowledge, in the Harman research about it. And people talk about it, but in the same way they talk about having high quality, capacitors and transformers in an amplifier, they just talk about it as it's better, it sounds better, but I don't ever see any research supporting that notion. So the whole thing was very confusing to me. And then he talks about how, you can have a speaker with flat frequency response, but a lot of people say that sounds boring. And the boringness comes from these supposedly dynamics limiting cheap crossover parts. And it's not like that's an implausible notion.
Right.
But I just don't know of any, if it's so important, where's the research? Where's the proof that this really does make a difference? And again, I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference. It's plausible that it makes a difference, but I need something more to go on than some guy thinks he heard something.
Yeah. Somebody made a really good comment on the video that said, I'm curious to know what the measurement unit for smear is. Could you not show us how this is reduced with your crossover upgrade like you show their frequency response is? Would the waterfall plot show it presumably smear relates to stored energy? If we can hear it, it can be measured. No. Mm-hmm. There were a couple of people who didn't like that.
Well, what didn't they like about it?
I think basically that he was sort of challenging the authority figure, Well,
it's I'm challenging the authority figure.
Yeah.
But as a colleague, not as a, in the same way that Andrew Jones or somebody might look at my speaker measurements and go, why'd you do that?
Yeah.
And I might say, because of this. And he'd be like, well, actually I've found that blah, 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 blah. And then we all learn, and in the same way that people, manufacturers have called me up about headphone measurements and said, how do you do that measurement?
Yeah. Let's just be completely hypothetical here. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's say you found some way to quantify this and you found whatever this means, like a 0.5% improvement in audio quality from that. I mean, that's still something. There are people who will pay thousands upon thousands of dollars for what they perceive to be a 0.5% improvement in sound quality, right?
Yeah, sure.
I just think we need to be honest about it. So, yeah.
We should probably take a break.
Let's do it.
And come back and talk about some active bass traps.
Yeah. In this third segment, we're going to be talking about another YouTube video, although from a different channel. This is from Tom Martin at The Absolute Sound. And this is a review. Yeah, the PSI Audio AVAA C214 active bass traps. Interesting review. This is not the video that I was expecting to see when you sent me the link and said, here's this review from The Absolute Sound. I have to admit.
That's why I sent it. That's big part of why I sent it.
Yeah, maybe I should be a little ashamed for having thought that. But yeah, there's actually some, really valid analysis here, some attempt at scientific explanation and sort of a discussion about bass that I would say is not of the sort that I normally see in high-end audio magazines. But you're the one who sent the video to me. Why did you send it?
Well, because normally the Absolute Sound is a convenient whipping boy for us because they just publish videos where they do like really bogus measurements to try to prove measurements are stupid, or they endorse products that you can just look at it and know don't work.
Yeah.
But this one, I kind of looked at it and I just thought like I was dimly aware of these active bass traps, which are sort of like it's like a subwoofer. It's actually got drivers and an amp in it, and it uses these drivers and amp to actively cancel some of the bass. So if you have a big bass resonance in the room, at 50 hertz or something like that, that's troublesome, you can, your subwoofer will put that out, but these will throw out canceling waves that are out of phase and therefore control that 50 hertz boom, right? Yeah. It's an entirely valid concept. Now, these things are like $4,000 a pop. Mm-hmm. And they sell them in that you can buy one, but they also sell them in packages of several, and they were originally invented for studio control rooms.
Yeah.
And let's face it, studio control rooms often do not use subwoofers. They often have big giant monitor speakers that kind of impress the clients, and then they have smaller monitor speakers they actually mix on. And some of them don't have subwoofers, and this is a thing that they could just toss into their rooms. They're, I guess, self-calibrating. And, for X thousands of dollars, you can get flatter, less boomy bass response in your room and make better mixing decisions. And I think that is for that kind of crowd that doesn't want to do a whole lot of acoustical engineering in a room that they're already used to, that is probably a good thing. But they're looking at it from the standpoint of audiophiles using these. And I want to say he starts out with a really good explanation of axial modes in a room and how, bass, rooms are a resonator, sort of like blowing across a jug, below what's called the Schroeder frequency, and above the Schroeder frequency, they act like reflectors, right? So with the resonator effect of the axial modes, you can get big, giant bass resonances in your room in different places. And he talks about how to calculate all that, and it's a pretty good discussion. But then he talks about the need for, bass traps to kind of get rid of some of the problems with these axial modes. And we'll get into, this is a different approach, I will say. That, you and I kind of come at the bass thing more from the home theater standpoint than from the audiophile standpoint. That's just one way to put it. And so they're kind of trying to cancel these bass resonances with these active bass traps, which, you can also do it with passive traps, basically big giant things filled with insulation or something, fiberglass or whatever, or you can do it actually with mass-loaded resonant panels. I think Tony Grimani Systems does that. Where they put them in the corner and they have a big kind of loaded panel that resonates at a certain frequency and basically counteracts the troublesome bass waves across, not just one frequency, but across a part of the bass band. And that's all fine, but the sort of he actually runs measurements to show the differences here. And normally when Absolute Sound does measurements, it's a disaster because they haven't taken the trouble to learn how or to buy good equipment or anything like that. But in this case, he's doing an in-room measurement of the bass. And so it's pretty legit. He doesn't explain how he does the measurement or anything like that. He doesn't explain if it's in the listening position or if it's an average of multiple positions. It's probably just in the listening position. I hope it's in the listening position, but it's in one position. And the differences he shows with these things are not what I would call dramatic. Now, you and I have both done a lot of bass measurements because I review a lot of subwoofers. I've reviewed a lot of subwoofer auto EQ systems, and you have reviewed a lot of room EQ systems built into audio video receivers.
Right. Yes. And two-channel gear. Yeah.
And two-channel gear. And so I'm going to guess, looking at this measurement, it's kind of like some of the lamer subwoofer EQ systems I've seen, and I've been testing these things for, at least 15 years, maybe 20. And some of them really don't do much. Some of them really suck. They don't have enough power to do anything. They make, a couple dB difference here and there that doesn't seem worth it to me. And his measurements, the way these things looked, at least in these measurements from a frequency response standpoint, seemed more in line with what I've seen from fairly lousy subwoofer EQ systems. What did you think?
Well, looking at his measurements, typically in my two-channel system now, I'm using Dirac. And in my home theater systems, I'm using Odyssey Multi-Q XT32, whatever. And interestingly, I think Multi-Q XT32 kind of does a better job with the bass these days. Now, both of these systems are not simply EQ. They use a proprietary combination of infinite impulse response filters and finite impulse response filters. And they don't really tell you how they're applying them where or what have you. But let me just back up and say, if I were doing room correction in my two-channel listening room, and I saw before and after results with Dirac that were similar to the measurements that he's showing in this video, I would be like, God, I can do better than that. I think I probably need to reposition my subwoofer, right? I know Dirac is capable of a lot more than this. So there's something going on somewhere that's not right in terms of physical setup. So let me redo my physical setup and then run Dirac again. So I would not be, I'll just say this for me personally, I would not be satisfied with the results that he showed in this video in terms of the measurements.
Yeah.
I think you could do a lot more. I mean, heck, I honestly kind of think I could do a lot more with Room EQ Wizard and the 3-band parametric EQ built into an SVS sub. So,
yeah. And I would say you almost certainly could. And he does talk about how the bass decays faster with the traps. Which is fine. That's legit. I mean, that's the same way like the Grimani Systems panels I told you about worked. It basically kind of just kills the ringing of the bass, which with frequency response adjustments, you can't really do that. However, you're bringing down the resonant peaks anyway, so the ring is not going to be as noticeable. You don't get rid of the resonance, you just sort of avoid agitating it. But I was really heartened by his listening conclusions, because so often the Absolute Sound will just listen to like some Class AB amp that's pretty much like the last Class AB amp they talked about and they raved about, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, it's a musical revelation!" And the inner detail on the Daniel Barenboim recording of the blah blah whatever was just so percolated through my brain and something. But in this case, he's a lot more guarded. This actually seems more like reading a John Atkinson review in Stereophile, where he's like, okay, look, it does some good things here, but this is kind of questionable, and kind of like, I'm not, this might be good for some people. And he's basically kind of coming at it from a much more reserved and frankly welcome viewpoint than we normally see in the Absolute Sound, where he's really saying like, well, you might need this. And I agree, you might need this. Or I shouldn't say that. This might benefit you. However, I have to say, these are $4,000 a pop, and for $2,000, I can get you 2 really good subwoofers and put them in the corners of the room, and that'll also get rid of a lot of those bass resonances a lot easier, and you'll also have a lot more bass output than you're going to get from probably whatever system you had before. And you can go EQ those. I mean, if they're, the SBS ones have built-in EQ, lots of them have built-in EQ nowadays. You can get a little add-on EQ from Mini DSP, or you can use the auto EQ built into your receiver, or who knows what. And you can probably get a better result than you're going to get from some kind of an active bass trap or a passive bass trap. And research bears this out. The Harman research that's kind of famous that Todd Welty at Harman wrote up, talking about how you can have one subwoofer or 2 subwoofers actually gets rid of a lot of the room mode problems, and if you go to 4, you get rid of even more of the room mode problems, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's already research on this, but I think that you're probably not going to see super enthusiastic coverage of subwoofer solutions in the Absolute Sound.
Yeah. Why do you think audiophiles tend to be averse to subwoofers?
Well, there are a lot of reasons, some of which are good. It's more complicated. They tend to not like complicated. They like simple things. And I can see the appeal of that. And also, it's so easy to mess up with a subwoofer. It's so easy to make them sound bad. You can give me any subwoofer, no matter how good, and I can easily make it sound bad. Yeah. And it takes some work, as you and I have both written about, in terms of positioning subwoofers and EQing subwoofers. You can plop a subwoofer in a room and get a certain result, but it's going to take a little bit of work on your part unless you have a really good auto EQ system. And I think so much of what audiophiles here have heard is very badly integrated subs. And look, let's face it, audiophiles are an older crowd. Many of their opinions were formed 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And 20 or 30 years ago, there kind of really weren't any good subwoofers. And I mean, compared to what we have now, where there's so many that are just mind-blowingly great. I mean, back in the mid-90s or something, it was really hard to find a good subwoofer. I know I tested a lot of them, and it was kind of like Velodyne and M&K. Those were always good. Everything else, most of the major speaker brands, it was spotty. They'd have one that was good and one that sucked. And they had really... The drivers were not the big beefy drivers you have nowadays. They were kind of wimpy. You didn't have Class D amps. You had Class A, B amps that maybe put out 100 watts or 150 watts. You know, it's so much easier. And none of them had DSP. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, they had to be tuned through analog means. And there just weren't a lot of good subs back then. And if audiophiles heard subs from 1995, they probably were disappointed. And they may have said, I don't want those things. And they got tower speakers instead. And the tower speakers are working fine for them.
Yeah.
And you know, let's face it, their preamps, unless they bought a Class A or a Parasound or,
Emotiva.
A few of those things have, you know, the 2-channel gear have subwoofer outputs, but most of them do not. And
well, I'm finding a lot more have sub outs, but they're just summed mono preamp. When I find an integrated amp or something like that has legitimate bass management, I get excited and I start digging deep into it in the review. And here are the settings and here are your steps for your crossover points and blah, blah, blah. And I find so often audiophiles are like, who cares? Like, you could have ignored that part of the review. Just, you know, tell me how this piano concerto sounds. And I don't know. I find it disappointing. I get so excited about legitimate bass management and none of my readers give a crap.
Well, a lot of my readers do. You're cultivating the wrong readers.
Yeah, maybe I'm the problem.
Yeah, I think I scared off all the ones that that don't like subwoofers.
Yeah. Well, anyway, bud, you ready to wrap this thing up?
Let's wrap it up. We're going to have some credits. We don't have any, man, it's 2024 and we have no new music. Do we?
Oh, that's true. We don't. Let's recycle one more time. We'll work on some new stuff for the next episode.
Okay, we need some new Butterburger house band music.
Yeah. Yeah. I just been so slammed. I haven't had any chances to do any beats or anything. And you've been on the road. It's been a lot, man. New music coming soon. We promise.
Yeah. And is that a threat or a promise?
Good point.
This will be edited by me, Brent Butterworth.
Yeah.
And mastered by me, Brent Butterworth. And I just got a new mastering compressor thingy.
Ooh, what'd you get?
I heard about it in a Rick Beato video talking about compression, and he was talking about how great the bus compressor was in the old SSL boards, solid state logic boards, and how there's a lot of software emulations of it, you know, plugins. And he said, this is a really, really great compressor for use on the stereo bus when you run your mix through this compressor as a global thing. And he suggested some settings for it. And boy, I got the Waves plugin for $30. And
very cool.
It is really good. So now I took the Chris Lord Algae preset and modified it into the Brent Butterworth preset. And I'm pretty thrilled. Although I'm going to need a new preset for the Audio
Unleashed
podcast because we have, only sporadic music in here.
Yes.
So
yes,
but it'll be a new preset, and perhaps I'll share it with you.
Very nice. That's
we'll have lots of extra punch.
Yeah,
extra punch, more inner detail, more better pace, rhythm, and timing.
Oh, I think more audio.
I'm using the Pratt preset.
Oh, I'm not even going to respond to that. All right. Well, thank you for listening to our mass market audience. Most of our listeners. We've got one more segment for patrons, but before we before we skip over to them, just thanks for listening. Thanks for being with us through 2023. And I don't know, tell somebody you like us. Share it with somebody. I don't know. I didn't come up with anything creative to say this week. Sorry, I'm feeling a little under the weather.
That's fine. But I think we can just say, but we should say happy 2024 to all of our listeners.
Yeah.
So,
cool. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye. And patrons, stick around. We got one more for you. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you.
Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/Audio Unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else.
And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing.
But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic or something that's a little more personal to us or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener.
Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests.
Yeah, and so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/Audio Unleashed.
Or Audio
Unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.